I'm Natalie, 28, and 30 minutes before my wedding, I stared in horror at my burning dress with my soon-to-be mother-in-law, Eleanor, standing beside it, empty gasoline can in hand. 3 years with David led to this unimaginable moment. This wasn't Eleanor's first attempt to destroy our relationship, but watching flames consume my wedding gown crystallized everything. She thought she'd won. She had no idea what I had planned. Before I tell you this wild story, I'd love to know where you're watching. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever dealt with difficult in-laws or family drama. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. I met David at my friend Taylor's art gallery opening in downtown Chicago 3 years ago. I'd gone to support Taylor not expecting to meet someone who would change my life. I was busy building my wedding photography business and honestly wasn't looking for a relationship. But there was David standing in front of a particularly striking abstract painting, completely absorbed. Something about his intense concentration and the slight furrow of his brow as he studied the artwork drew me in. "What do you think it means?" I asked, stepping beside him. He turned slightly startled and then smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his blue eyes. "I think it represents the chaos we all feel inside but rarely express," he said thoughtfully. "At least that's my amateur interpretation." That was the beginning of our conversation, which flowed effortlessly from art to our backgrounds. Both of us had grown up in small towns before moving to Chicago to pursue our dreams. David had come from Woodridge, Illinois, while I'd grown up in a tiny town in Wisconsin. We'd both been drawn to the energy and opportunities of the big city. I learned he was a pediatric surgeon at Northwestern Memorial, dedicated to his young patients in a way that immediately touched my heart. The way his eyes lit up when he talked about helping children made me see the passion behind his career choice. When I shared that I was a wedding photographer who had built my business from scratch after starting as an assistant, he seemed genuinely impressed rather than dismissive, asking thoughtful questions about my creative process. That night turned into dinner at a small Italian restaurant around the corner, which turned into a second date 2 days later, which eventually evolved into spending every possible moment together. Despite his demanding schedule with 70-hour work weeks and emergency surgeries, and my weekend wedding shoots that often kept me working until the early morning hours, we found ways to make time for each other. We'd escape the city for weekend getaways whenever our schedules aligned, driving to Michigan's picturesque beaches, hiking in starved Rock State Park, or simply exploring new neighborhoods in Chicago. During these stolen moments, we shared our dreams, fears, and the parts of ourselves we didn't show to others. I told him about losing my mother to cancer when I was 20 and how that loss pushed me to pursue photography, seriously capturing precious moments that could never be recreated. He shared the pressures of having parents with sky-high expectations and how he sometimes felt he'd chosen medicine partially to please them. Speaking of his parents, that's where our story takes its first complicated turn. David came from money, serious money. His father, Robert, was a high-powered investment banker who managed portfolios for Chicago's elite. His mother, Eleanor, came from old money, the kind of wealth that's been in families for generations and creates a particular type of entitlement. She was a socialite who served on the boards of Chicago's most prestigious charitable organizations and maintained a carefully curated social circle. I met them 6 months into our relationship at their magnificent Mile penthouse for a formal dinner. I spent hours choosing the right outfit, finally settling on a navy blue cocktail dress that I hope struck the right balance between elegant and not trying too hard. David assured me his parents would love me, but I noticed a slight tension in his voice that hadn't been there before. The moment I stepped into their immaculate home, I felt Eleanor's critical gaze assessing everything from my dress to my shoes to the way I held my posture. She was beautiful in a severe way, perfectly styled, blonde hair, an expensive designer outfit, and jewelry that probably cost more than my car. She air-kissed my cheeks with practiced precision. "So lovely to finally meet you, Natalie," she said, her voice warm but her eyes cold. "David has told us so little about you." The emphasis on little wasn't lost on me, but I smiled and thanked her for the invitation. Throughout dinner, Eleanor asked probing questions about my family background, my education, state university, not Ivy League like David, and my career. When I explained I was a wedding photographer, she pursed her lips slightly. "How creative," she said in a tone that made it clear this wasn't a compliment. "Is that sustainable long-term? So many little businesses struggle these days." Before I could respond, she smoothly changed the subject to Victoria, David's ex-girlfriend, whom he had dated for nearly 2 years before meeting me. Victoria, as Eleanor repeatedly pointed out, came from a lovely family. Her father was a prominent judge, and her mother ran in the same social circles as Eleanor. The fact that Victoria was now engaged to a congressman's son seemed to particularly delight Eleanor. Such a shame they couldn't make it work. She sighed, looking pointedly at David. They were so well matched. David squeezed my hand under the table and tried to change the subject, while his father, Robert, a quieter, more reserved man, looked uncomfortable but said nothing to rein in his wife. Later that night, when I mentioned to David that his mother seemed fixated on his ex, he brushed it off. "Mom's just protective," he explained. "She and Victoria's mother are close friends, so it was complicated when we broke up. She'll warm up to you, I promise. She just needs time." I wanted to believe him, but something in my gut told me Eleanor had already made up her mind about me. Still, I was in love with David, not his family, and I hoped that with time I could at least establish a cordial relationship with his mother. Over the next year and a half, my interactions with Eleanor remained strained. Every achievement in my photography business was met with faint praise and subtle digs. "How nice that you're doing so well with your little hobby," she'd say after I mentioned booking a high-profile wedding, or she'd express surprise when I mentioned being published in wedding magazines. "They'll feature anyone these days, I suppose." David continued to mediate, always trying to smooth things over. "She doesn't mean it that way," he'd insist after particularly cutting remarks. "That's just how she talks." Despite the tension with his family, our relationship flourished. David was my partner in every sense, supportive, loving, and sharing the same vision for our future. After 2 years together during a vacation to coastal Maine, he proposed on a cliff overlooking the ocean at sunset. It was private, meaningful, and perfect. Just us, the sound of waves crashing below, and promises of a future together. When I called my father with the news, he cried happy tears. When David called his parents, his father offered congratulations, while his mother's response was a cool, "Well, I suppose we should start planning then." I knew the engagement would bring more interactions with Eleanor, but I had no idea just how difficult wedding planning would become with my future mother-in-law involved. The engagement bliss lasted approximately 72 hours before Eleanor launched her campaign to control every aspect of our wedding. What should have been an exciting time of planning our future together quickly became a battleground of wills and conflicting visions. Our first major clash came over the venue. David and I had visited a charming lakeside retreat about an hour outside Chicago. With its rustic wooden beams, panoramic lake views, and intimate setting for around 100 guests, it felt perfect for the relaxed, meaningful celebration we envisioned. When we shared photos with his parents over dinner, Eleanor's expression soured immediately. "This is quaint," she said, the word dripping with disdain. "But of course you can't seriously be considering it. The Lakewood Country Club has been holding a date for you." I glanced at David in confusion. We hadn't asked any venue to hold dates. "I took the liberty," Eleanor continued, noticing my expression. "All of our family events are at Lakewood. David's christening, his graduation party, all the important milestones." She reached over to pat David's hand. "The ballroom can accommodate the 350 guests on our preliminary list." 350, I echoed, stunned. We had discussed inviting around 100 people total. We were thinking of something much smaller, actually. "Smaller?" Eleanor laughed, as if I'd made a charming joke. "Darling, that's simply not possible. Your father has business associates who expect invitations. David's father has colleagues, and I have commitments to friends who attended every important event in David's life." "But it's our wedding," I said carefully. "We want something intimate with just our closest friends and family." Eleanor's smile tightened. "Natalie, perhaps you don't understand how these things work in certain circles. There are social obligations that can't be ignored." The conversation deteriorated from there, with Eleanor listing all the reasons the lakeside venue was impractical, inappropriate, and beneath our standards. David, caught between us, suggested a compromise. We would use the country club but incorporate elements of the rustic theme I loved in the decorations. It wasn't what I wanted, but seeing the stress on his face, as he tried to navigate between his mother's expectations and my wishes, I reluctantly agreed. It was the first of many compromises that increasingly felt one-sided. Over the following weeks, Eleanor inserted herself into every aspect of planning. She scheduled appointments with vendors without consulting me, then expressed exaggerated concern when my work commitments prevented me from attending last-minute meetings. "I suppose your job does keep you busy," she would say with a thin smile. "Not to worry, I made the decisions in your absence. I have quite the eye for these things." Those decisions frequently overrode choices David and I had already made. The elegant wildflower arrangements we'd selected with the florist mysteriously transformed into elaborate rose and orchid displays that matched the country club's formal aesthetic. The menu featuring our favourite foods was revised to include Eleanor's preferred catering options. The band we loved was deemed too casual and replaced with a string quartet for the ceremony and a 12-piece orchestra for the reception. Each time I raised concerns with David, he would run his hand through his hair in that frustrated way I'd come to recognise. "It's just not worth the fight, Nat," he'd say. "Let's focus on the important thing, that we're getting married." But as the months passed, I began to wonder if these battles were actually about something much more important than wedding details. They were about respect boundaries and what our future together would look like. My best friend Jordan, who had witnessed several uncomfortable interactions with Eleanor, finally pulled me aside after a particularly tense cake tasting, where Eleanor had dismissed my preferences as pedestrian. "Nat, this isn't just about the wedding," Jordan said bluntly. "This is about the next 40 years of your life. If David won't stand up to his mother now, what makes you think he ever will?" Her words hit me hard because they articulated the growing unease I'd been feeling. Still, I loved David and believed in our relationship. I convinced myself that once the wedding was over, things would improve. Then came the guest list debacle. When the preliminary count came back at nearly 400 people, I discovered that Eleanor had added over 50 of her friends and acquaintances without consulting either of us. People neither David nor I had ever met would apparently be witnessing one of the most important days of our lives. When I confronted her, Eleanor's response was dismissive. "These are important social connections, Natalie. You'll understand when you've been part of our world longer. Besides, they're all bringing lovely gifts." She smiled as if this last point should settle the matter. "The wedding isn't about gifts," I insisted. "It's about celebrating with people who care about us." Eleanor patted my cheek in a gesture that felt deeply condescending. "Such idealism. That's what David loves about you, I suppose." The situation escalated further when Eleanor arranged a meeting with her family attorney without telling me. I arrived at what I thought was a lunch with just her, only to find a stern-looking man in a suit waiting with contract papers. "What's this?" I asked, my stomach sinking as I scanned the document. "A prenuptial agreement with terms that were insultingly restrictive." "Just a formality?" Eleanor said smoothly. "All marriages in our family have proper protections in place. I'm sure you understand, given your background." I felt my cheeks burn with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "My background? Well," she said with false sweetness, "you don't come from the kind of family that's accustomed to the wealth the Harrises have. It's only natural to have safeguards." I left the lunch without signing anything shaking with humiliation. Later that same day, while picking up some table-setting samples at the country club, I overheard Eleanor speaking to a friend in the lounge, not realizing I was nearby. "She's clearly after David's money," Eleanor was saying. "A wedding photographer. Can you imagine Robert and I are just taking appropriate precautions? David's too blinded by infatuation to see what's happening." That night, I finally reached my breaking point. When David came home from the hospital, I laid everything out. The constant undermining the prenup ambush and what I'd overheard at the club. "This has to stop, David," I said, fighting back tears. "Your mother doesn't respect me and she's actively trying to control our relationship. I need you to set some boundaries with her." David looked torn, but he nodded. "You're right. I'll talk to her tomorrow, I promise. This has gone too far." But after his supposed conversation with Eleanor, nothing changed. If anything, her behaviour became more subtle but no less manipulative. And David, while sympathetic to my frustration, continued to avoid direct conflict with his mother. I began to wonder if I was fighting a losing battle, not just against Eleanor, but against a family dynamic that had been established long before I entered the picture. As the wedding date approached, Eleanor's attempts to derail our relationship intensified from subtle undermining to active sabotage. Looking back, I should have seen the escalation coming, but I was too focused on trying to salvage the wedding day and my relationship with David. The first major red flag came when my father called me confused about not receiving a formal invitation, despite the save-the-date card months earlier. When I checked with other members of my family and several of my close friends, none had received invitations either, though all had been on the final guest list I'd approved. When confronted, Eleanor expressed exaggerated shock. "The printer must have made a terrible mistake with that batch," she said. Her concern so perfectly performed it would have been impressive if it weren't so infuriating. "I'll handle it immediately." Replacement invitations were sent, but mysteriously arrived just 10 days before the wedding, giving many of my loved ones almost no time to make travel arrangements. 5 of my closest college friends and 2 of my aunts couldn't rearrange their schedules on such short notice. Then came the rumours. My bridesmaid Casey pulled me aside during a dress fitting to reluctantly inform me that Eleanor had been telling members of the wedding party that I was primarily interested in accessing the Harris family connections for my photography business, and had made comments about me being a gold digger with an eye on the family trust fund. I knew it was garbage, Casey assured me, but I thought you should know what she's saying behind your back. I was hurt, but not surprised. The subtle campaign to isolate me was working. I could feel some of David's family friends becoming cooler toward me, and even his sister Melissa, who had initially been friendly, was now keeping her distance. The bridal shower debacle came next. Jordan had spent weeks planning a beautiful shower at her apartment, inviting female friends and family from both sides. 2 days before the event, Eleanor scheduled an unmissable family luncheon for the exact same time, insisting that Melissa and all the female relatives on David's side attend. Her excuse was that the date had been set months ago for a favourite cousin's visit from Europe. Though no one had mentioned this important visitor until that moment, the shower proceeded with only my side present, while social media filled with photos of the Harris women at an elegant restaurant raising champagne flutes in celebration of something that apparently couldn't be rescheduled. But the dress incident was what truly revealed the lengths Eleanor would go to disrupt our wedding. I had found a beautiful gown at a small boutique, an A-line silhouette with delicate lace detailing and a modest train. It wasn't the designer label Eleanor had pushed for, but it made me feel beautiful and confident. During the final fitting, Eleanor insisted on attending to see the alterations coming together. Throughout the appointment, she made small comments about how the dress might be a bit plain for such a formal venue and not quite special enough for a Harris family wedding. The boutique owner, sensing tension, tactfully suggested we all celebrate with a glass of champagne after I changed out of the gown. As the owner carefully hung the dress, Eleanor moved toward it with her full glass of red wine. What happened next appeared to be an accident. She tripped slightly on the platform edge, sending the wine splashing across the front of my wedding dress. "Oh my!" she exclaimed, hand flying to her mouth in apparent horror. "How terribly clumsy of me." The boutique owner rushed to begin treating the stain, but we all knew a white dress doused in red wine was likely ruined. As I fought back tears, Eleanor patted my shoulder. "Perhaps this is a blessing in disguise," she suggested. "Now we can visit that designer showroom I mentioned." They could rush order something truly spectacular. I declined through gritted teeth instead, working with the boutique to find a replacement gown from their inventory that could be altered in the 2 weeks remaining before the wedding. The result wasn't my dream dress, but it was beautiful enough, and I was determined not to let Eleanor's accident derail everything. The final straw came when I discovered Eleanor had contacted my ex-boyfriend Mark, a man who had been emotionally abusive during our brief relationship in college, supposedly to hire him as a wedding photographer. "I found his work online and thought it would be a lovely surprise, she explained when I confronted her wide-eyed innocence perfected. I had no idea there was history there. This was an obvious lie. Mark's photography website was virtually non-existent, and his work was amateur at best. The only way she could have found him was by deliberately digging into my past. Furthermore, I was a wedding photographer myself with dozens of talented colleagues. The idea that we would hire an outside photographer, let alone my ex, was absurd. That night, I reached my breaking point. I called David in tears and told him I couldn't go through with a wedding that had become a psychological battlefield. I explained every sabotage attempt in detail, laid out the pattern too clear to ignore, and told him I was considering postponing until we could plan a smaller ceremony without his mother's involvement. For the first time, David seemed to truly hear me. He came home immediately, held me as I cried, and promised to confront his mother once and for all. The next day, he drove to his parents' home alone, for what he described later as the most difficult conversation of his life. According to David, Eleanor had burst into tears, claiming she was being misunderstood and that her actions were motivated by love for her son and desire for a perfect wedding. She insisted the wine spill was a genuine accident. The invitation, mix-up, a printer error, and the contact with my ex, a misguided attempt to surprise me. She was very convincing, David admitted when he returned looking exhausted. For a moment, even I started questioning whether we've been misinterpreting things. But he had stood firm, telling Eleanor that her involvement in wedding planning was now limited to showing up as a guest. Any further interference would result in them eloping without any family present. She seemed to get the message, he said. She apologized and promised to respect our wishes going forward. I wanted to believe this had worked, but after months of escalating behavior, I didn't trust Eleanor's sudden change of heart. Without telling David, I began implementing contingency plans with Jordan's help. First, I purchased a backup wedding dress, even more beautiful than my replacement, and stored it at Jordan's apartment. Next, I compiled detailed documentation of all Eleanor's sabotage attempts, including text messages, emails, and testimonials from friends who had witnessed her behavior. I wasn't sure how this evidence might be needed, but having it felt like reclaiming some control. Most importantly, I arranged for security cameras to be discreetly installed in the bridal suite and other key locations for the wedding day. This was Jordan's suggestion. Her brother worked for a security company and helped us set everything up under the guise of general wedding security. I also hired 2 additional security staff who were briefed on Eleanor and instructed to keep a respectful but watchful eye on her throughout the day. "Do you think I'm being paranoid?" I asked Jordan as we finalized these preparations. "After everything she's done," Jordan replied. "I think you're being smart. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst." As the wedding week arrived and the rehearsal dinner passed without incident, I began to wonder if my precautions had been unnecessary. Perhaps David's confrontation had actually worked. Perhaps Eleanor had accepted that she couldn't stop the wedding. But deep down I knew better. The calm felt less like acceptance and more like the eye of a hurricane. Something told me Eleanor wouldn't surrender her control without one final desperate attempt to assert her will. I just never imagined how far she would go. The morning of our wedding dawned clear and bright. One of those perfect October days in Chicago when the air is crisp but the sun is warm. From my suite at the Lakewood Country Club, I could see the ceremony site being prepared on the lawn white chairs arranged in neat rows facing an elegant floral arch with the lake sparkling behind it. Despite my ongoing concerns about Eleanor, I felt a surge of happiness. In just a few hours, David and I would be married. Whatever happened with his mother, we would face it together as husband and wife. My bridesmaids arrived early, bringing coffee and pastries, their excitement helping to settle my nerves. Jordan immediately took charge, organising everyone's timing for hair and makeup while keeping the atmosphere light and celebratory. "No sign of Hurricane Eleanor yet," she whispered to me as she helped unpack my things. "The security guys are in position and I've got your backup dress in my car just in case." I gave her hand a grateful squeeze. "Maybe we won't need it." David said she was very subdued at the rehearsal dinner. "Let's hope," Jordan replied, though her expression remained skeptical. The morning progressed smoothly. My hair was styled in loose waves with small white flowers woven through, and my makeup artist created a natural look that made me feel like the best version of myself. As my bridesmaids helped me into my wedding dress, the replacement for my wine-soaked original, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, Eleanor had accepted defeat. Then came a text from David. "Mom insisted on special mother-son breakfast, trying to keep peace. We'll be there by noon. Love you." A flicker of unease ran through me. Eleanor arranging a private breakfast meant she would have David's undivided attention, without me or anyone else to intervene if she tried to plant last-minute doubts in his mind. "Everything okay?" asked Casey, noticing my frown. "Just David, running a little behind," I said, forcing a smile. I didn't want to cast a shadow over the day by voicing my concerns. Around 11:30, as final touch-ups were being applied to hair and makeup, there was a knock at the suite door. Jordan answered it cautiously, then stepped aside to reveal Eleanor impeccably dressed in a pale blue designer suit, holding an ice bucket with a bottle of champagne. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice warm and her smile appearing genuine. I thought the bride deserved some premium champagne before the ceremony. The bridesmaids exchanged glances, aware of the tension, but not wanting to create an awkward situation. I nodded, deciding that refusing her entry would only create drama. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said carefully. "That's thoughtful of you." She glided into the room, setting the champagne on a side table and looking around at the controlled chaos of the bridal preparations. Her gaze lingered on my dress, hanging by the window, ready for me to step into. "The replacement dress turned out quite nicely," she commented, and I caught the slightest emphasis on replacement, a subtle reminder of her wine spill incident. "It did," I agreed, keeping my voice neutral. "Everything's come together beautifully. Eleanor moved around the room with practiced social grace, complimenting each bridesmaid on her appearance, while gradually maneuvering closer to me. Her behaviour was so different from her usual coldness toward me that it immediately triggered my suspicions. "David tells me you had a lovely breakfast together," I said, watching her reaction carefully. "Yes, a special tradition before he takes this big step," she replied smoothly. "I wanted some time with just my son before he officially becomes a husband." The way she said husband carried a slight chill despite her smile remaining fixed in place. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an urgent text from our wedding coordinator. Emergency with flower arrangement at ceremony site. Need your opinion ASAP. I hesitated, reluctant to leave Eleanor in the bridal suite, but the coordinator sent a follow-up. "Really need you here." "I have to check on something," I said, turning to Jordan. "Would you mind coming with me?" "Actually," Jordan replied, glancing at her own phone, "the photographer is asking about group shots of the bridesmaids on the grand staircase. Maybe we should all head down." A debate ensued about timing and logistics, creating momentary confusion. Eleanor smoothly interjected, "You all go handle the photography. I'll stay here and keep an eye on things. Perhaps I'll even help set up that lovely champagne for when you return." The decision was made quickly in the rush of wedding day chaos. My bridesmaids gathered their things, and despite my lingering concern, I headed out with them to address the flower emergency, leaving Eleanor alone in the suite with my wedding dress. The flower issue turned out to be minor, a dispute about whether to add additional arrangements along the aisle, and was resolved quickly. As I headed back toward the suite, eager to get dressed with only 40 minutes until the ceremony, I caught a distinctive smell in the hallway. Gasoline, then smoke. I broke into a run, my heart pounding with sudden terror, and burst through the suite door to a scene straight from a nightmare. On the balcony of the bridal suite stood Eleanor, watching with cold satisfaction as my wedding dress burned on the concrete flames, leaping from the delicate fabric. An empty gasoline container lay on its side nearby, explaining the overwhelming chemical smell mixed with the smoke. "What have you done?" I gasped, frozen in shock and horror. Eleanor turned to me, her mask of politeness completely gone, replaced by raw determination and something like triumph. "You'll never be good enough for my son," she said, her voice eerily calm. "This wedding is over." I collapsed to my knees on the plush carpet, tears streaming down my face as I watched the dress, and seemingly my wedding day, go up in flames. In that moment of devastation, Eleanor stepped past me toward the door, pausing only to add, "I'll go tell the guests there's been an unfortunate cancellation." As she reached for the door handle, it swung open to reveal Jordan, whose expression shifted instantly from excitement to shock as she took in the scene. Me on the floor in tears, the burning dress on the balcony, and Eleanor's unmistakable guilt. "What the hell?" Jordan exclaimed, rushing to my side while pulling out her phone. Eleanor straightened her jacket. "There's been a change of plans," she said coolly. "The wedding is off. Natalie's dress has met with an unfortunate accident." "The only accident here is that you weren't caught sooner," Jordan replied, already dialing security. She turned to me, her voice gentle but urgent. "Nat, remember our plan. This isn't over." "I get." Eleanor's smug expression faltered slightly. "Plan what plan?" Jordan ignored her, helping me to my feet. "The cameras caught everything," she whispered to me. "And I've got your backup dress in my car. We can still do this." Through my tears, I felt a surge of resolve. Eleanor had played her final card, believing it would be the winning move. She had no idea I'd been preparing for exactly this kind of sabotage. As security arrived in response to Jordan's call, I took a deep breath and made my decision. The wedding would proceed, but not quite in the way anyone, especially Eleanor, expected. The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of focused activity. While security detained Eleanor in a separate room, Jordan raced to her car to retrieve my secret backup dress. My bridesmaids rallied around me, their initial shock giving way to determined support. "I can't believe she actually set your dress on fire," Casey kept repeating, shaking her head in disbelief as she helped fix my makeup, which had been ruined by tears. "I can," Jordan said grimly, returning with a garment bag. "But she's about to learn that she messed with the wrong bride." The backup dress was everything the others weren't. It was entirely my choice, without Eleanor's input or knowledge. I had found it at a small boutique in a different part of town, a place Eleanor would never set foot in. The gown was a sleek modern design with vintage-inspired lace details. a plunging back and a subtle train that would trail elegantly behind me. Most importantly, it fit my personality perfectly, something Eleanor had tried to erase throughout the planning process. As my friends helped me into the dress, I received a call from David, who was already at the ceremony site. "Hey, are you okay? We're running about 20 minutes behind schedule," he said, sounding concerned but unaware of the drama unfolding. For a split second, I considered telling him everything over the phone, but this wasn't a conversation to have remotely. "There's been a slight issue, but we're handling it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Everything's fine. The ceremony will start a bit late. Is my mother with you? She said she was going to bring you champagne, but she hasn't returned." "She was here," I confirmed carefully. "We'll talk when I see you, okay? I love you." "I love you too," he replied, sounding confused but trusting. Meanwhile, the wedding coordinator had been informed of the situation and was helping to stall the ceremony, telling guests there was a minor technical issue being resolved. The coordinator, who had witnessed some of Eleanor's difficult behavior during planning, didn't need much explanation to grasp the severity of the situation. "Take all the time you need," she assured me. "I've adjusted the schedule and told the musicians to extend the prelude music." With the immediate logistics handled, I faced a crucial decision about how to proceed. The evidence against Eleanor was irrefutable. The security cameras had captured her deliberate actions in high-definition clarity. But how and when to reveal this was another matter entirely. "We could just continue with the ceremony and deal with Eleanor later," Casey suggested gently. "You don't need this additional stress on your wedding day." I considered this option. We could proceed as if nothing had happened, letting security keep Eleanor away from the ceremony. David would wonder where his mother was, but I could create some excuse and reveal the truth after our vows. But as I looked at my reflection in the mirror, now wearing a dress that truly represented me rather than Eleanor's vision, I knew I couldn't begin my marriage with such a significant deception, even one meant to preserve peace. "No," I decided firmly. "This needs to be addressed now before we say our vows. David deserves to know what kind of person his mother really is, and I deserve to know that he's choosing me with his eyes fully open." Jordan nodded approvingly. "So what's the plan?" Working quickly, we set up my laptop to display the security footage. The wedding coordinator arranged for a projector and screen to be discreetly positioned near the ceremony area, ready to be revealed when needed. Eleanor remained under supervision in a separate room, unaware of these preparations. My father arrived at the bridal suite just as the final touches were being put on my appearance. He stopped in the doorway, his eyes widening at the sight of me in a dress he hadn't seen before. "Natalie," he breathed, emotion filling his voice. "You look absolutely beautiful." I moved to embrace him, careful not to wrinkle the dress. "Thank you, Dad." "They told me there was some trouble with Eleanor," he said, his expression darkening. "Are you all right?" "I am now," I assured him. "But we're going to have a slightly unconventional ceremony." I explained the situation and my decision. My father listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening as I described Eleanor's escalating behavior, culminating in the burning dress. "I always knew she didn't approve of me," I concluded, "but I never imagined she'd go this far." My father took my hands in his. "Your mother would be so proud of you today," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just for how beautiful you look, but for your strength in standing up for yourself." The mention of my mother, who had passed away years before I met David, brought fresh tears to my eyes. "I wish she could be here." "She is," he said simply, squeezing my hands. "And she'd tell you to go show them what you're made of." With my father's support bolstering my resolve, I was ready. The wedding coordinator confirmed that all guests were seated, the groom and his groomsmen were in position, and the musicians were prepared to transition to the processional music at my signal. "What about Eleanor?" I asked. "Security will escort her to a seat in the front row just before you make your entrance," the coordinator explained. "She doesn't know about the backup dress or the video. She likely thinks you're about to announce the cancellation of the wedding." The thought of Eleanor's shock when I appeared in a beautiful dress, ready to proceed with the ceremony, gave me a small sense of satisfaction. But this wasn't about petty revenge. It was about truth boundaries and beginning my marriage on honest footing. My bridesmaids proceeded down the aisle one by one, each giving me an encouraging smile or squeeze of the hand before they departed. Jordan, my maid of honor, was the last to go. "Ready to give that witch the surprise of her life," she whispered, hugging me carefully. "Ready to marry the man I love." I corrected her, though I couldn't help returning her smile. Then it was just my father and me waiting for our cue. Through the doors, I could see Eleanor being escorted to her seat in the front row, her expression a mixture of confusion and growing alarm as she realized the ceremony was proceeding despite her actions. The wedding coordinator gave us the signal, and the musicians began playing the processional music. My father offered me his arm, and with a deep breath, I prepared to walk toward my future, whatever it might hold after the next few minutes. "No matter what happens, Bissums," my father murmured as we began our walk, "remember that you deserve someone who chooses you completely and without reservation." His words steadied me as we stepped through the doors, and every head turned to watch our entrance. The collective gasp from the assembled guests told me the backup dress was a success, but I had eyes only for David waiting for me at the end of the aisle. His face lit up with love and wonder as he saw me completely unaware of the drama that had unfolded or the revelation that was about to come. In that moment, looking at him, I knew that whatever happened next, my love for him was real. I just needed to know if his love for me was strong enough to withstand the ugly truth about his mother. As my father and I reached the altar, he placed my hand in David's and stepped back. David squeezed my fingers gently, whispering, "You're breathtaking." The minister stepped forward, smiling warmly at the assembled guests. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of David and Natalie in holy matrimony." He continued with the traditional opening remarks before arriving at the words I had been waiting for. "If anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot lawfully be joined together in matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." The traditional pause followed, during which Eleanor shifted in her seat, clearly conflicted about whether to object publicly after her private attempt to derail the wedding had failed. Before she could decide, I squeezed David's hands and took a step forward. "Actually," I said, my voice clear and steady despite my racing heart, "before we proceed, there's something that needs to be addressed." Murmurs rippled through the assembled guests as I stepped forward. David looked at me with confusion, and Eleanor's expression shifted from momentary triumph to growing apprehension. "Natalie," David whispered, concern evident in his voice. "What's going on?" I turned to face him directly, keeping my voice low enough that only he could hear my next words. "I love you, David. I want to marry you more than anything. But before we say our vows, you need to see something that happened less than an hour ago." Before he could respond, I nodded to the wedding coordinator, who signaled to an assistant stationed by the projector. The white screen that had been positioned discreetly to the side of the ceremony area lowered into view, and the video began to play. The footage was unmistakably clear: Eleanor entering the bridal suite, her calculated movements as she waited for everyone to leave, the deliberate way she carried my wedding dress to the balcony, doused it with gasoline and set it aflame. The audio captured her cold declaration that I would never be good enough for her son and that the wedding was over. Gasps and exclamations broke out among the guests as the reality of what they were witnessing sank in. I kept my eyes on David, watching as shock, disbelief, and then a terrible understanding crossed his face. When the video ended, silence fell over the gathering. All eyes turned to Eleanor, who had risen halfway out of her seat, her carefully maintained composure crumbling. "That's been edited," she said weakly, looking around at the horrified faces surrounding her. "That's not what happened." David turned to stare at his mother, his face pale with shock. "Mom, is this true? Did you burn Natalie's wedding dress?" Eleanor straightened, attempting to regain control of the situation. "David, darling, you don't understand. I was trying to protect you. She's not right for our family. She never has been. Not right for our family." David repeated, his voice rising with emotion. "She's the woman I love, the woman I've chosen to spend my life with." "How could you do this?" Eleanor stepped into the aisle, moving toward her son with an outstretched hand. "Everything I've done has been for you. Victoria called last week. She's having second thoughts about her engagement. You could still have the life you were meant to have with someone from your own world." A new wave of murmurs swept through the guests at this revelation. I stood frozen, watching the family drama unfold, uncertain whether to intervene. David shook his head in disbelief. "My own world, Mum Natalie, is my world now, and apparently you've been trying to destroy that since the day you met her." "I've been trying to save you from making a terrible mistake," Eleanor insisted, her voice taking on a desperate edge. "You're blinded by infatuation. She's using you to advance her career, to access our connections, our money." "Stop." David's voice rang out with an authority I'd never heard before. "Just stop. For years I've made excuses for your behavior. I've looked the other way. When you were cold to Natalie, when you undermined her choices, when you tried to control our relationship, I told myself you just needed time to accept her, that you were protective, because you loved me. He took a step toward his mother, his expression hardening. But this setting fire to her wedding dress, trying to destroy one of the most important days of our lives. There's no excuse for that, Mum. None. Eleanor seemed to shrink under her son's anger, but she made one final attempt to sway him. David, please. Everything I've done has been out of love. That's not love, David replied firmly. That's control, and I won't allow it anymore. He turned to the security personnel who had been standing discreetly at the edges of the gathering. Please escort my mother out. As the security guards moved toward Eleanor, Richard David's father finally stood from his seat in the front row. Until now, he had remained silent, his expression a mixture of shock and dismay as the events unfolded. Eleanor, he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the tense silence. This has gone far enough. It's time to go. Eleanor looked to her husband, perhaps expecting support, but finding none. Her gaze swept over the assembled guests, most of whom were averting their eyes or staring in open disapproval. Finally, she looked back at her son. You'll regret this, she said, her voice breaking. She'll never fit into our world. Maybe I don't want to be part of that world anymore, David replied. Not if it means accepting this kind of behavior. With a final anguished look at her son, Eleanor allowed herself to be escorted from the ceremony, Richard following a few steps behind after giving David an apologetic nod. As they disappeared from view, David turned back to me, his eyes filled with regret and concern. Natalie, I am so sorry. I had no idea she would go this far. If I had known... I reached for his hand, steadying him. I know you didn't, but I need to know something right now before we go any further. Anything? He said, his attention entirely focused on me, despite the whispers and movement among our guests. I love you, David. I want to marry you, but I need to know that you're choosing me, completely and without reservation, that you're ready to set real boundaries with your mother, that our marriage and our future family will come first. David didn't hesitate. I choose you, he said firmly. I should have made that clearer long before today. I let things go too far because it was easier than confronting the truth about my mother's behavior. That ends now. He squeezed my hands. I choose you, Natalie, today and every day. Relief and love washed over me. I had been prepared for him to be conflicted, to need time to process what had happened. His immediate clarity was more than I had dared hope for. I turned to the minister, who had been watching the proceedings with a stunned expression. I think we're ready to continue now. The minister cleared his throat, clearly thrown off script by the unprecedented events, but quickly regained his composure. Yes, of course. Shall we proceed with the ceremony? David nodded, not taking his eyes off me. Absolutely. There was a moment of uncertainty as guests shifted in their seats, processing the dramatic scene they had just witnessed. Then from the back row, someone began to applaud. The applause spread gradually until the entire gathering was clapping. Not the usual response during a wedding ceremony, but a clear statement of support for the stand we had taken. As the applause died down, the minister resumed the ceremony with renewed purpose. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of David and Natalie, who have already demonstrated the strength of their commitment through extraordinary circumstances. The ceremony that followed was unlike any wedding I could have imagined, yet perfect in its authenticity. Our vows, which we had written ourselves, took on deeper meaning in light of what had transpired. David added an impromptu promise to always prioritize our relationship and stand firm against anyone who would try to come between us. When the minister pronounced us husband and wife, David's kiss held a passion and determination that communicated everything words couldn't express. As we turned to face our guests as a married couple, I felt not just joy, but a profound sense of triumph. Eleanor had tried her best to prevent this moment, but in the end, love and truth had prevailed. The reception that followed was both celebration and catharsis. With Eleanor and Richard absent, there was an initial awkwardness as guests processed the dramatic events they had witnessed. But as the evening progressed, the mood lightened. David's sister Melissa, freed from her mother's controlling presence, approached me with tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry I didn't stand up to her more, she said, embracing me. I've watched her manipulate situations my entire life, and I just accepted it as normal. It's not your fault, I assured her. Family dynamics are complicated. Well, they're going to be different from now on, she declared with newfound determination. Throughout the evening, David remained by my side, both of us processing the emotional whiplash of the day while celebrating our new beginning. During a quiet moment between dances, he pulled me aside. "I keep thinking about all the warning signs I ignored," he admitted, his expression troubled. "All the times you tried to tell me what was happening and I made excuses for her." "You wanted to believe the best about your mother," I said gently. "That's understandable." He shook his head. "It was more than that. I was conditioned to keep the peace, to never confront her directly. It was easier to ask you to accommodate her behavior than to address the real problem." He looked at me with renewed resolve. "That changes now. I promise you our relationship will always come first." As we swayed together during our first dance, surrounded by friends and family who had witnessed both the ugliness and beauty of the day, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the truth was finally out, sadness for the relationship with my mother-in-law that would never be, but overwhelming joy in the knowledge that David and I had faced our first major test as a couple and emerged stronger. The wedding photographer, a colleague of mine who had captured the entire dramatic scene, approached us with an update. "I've got some incredible shots of you in that stunning backup dress," she told me with a smile. "Honestly, it's far more beautiful than the one that, well, you know." "Everything worked out exactly as it was supposed to," I replied, realizing the truth of those words as I spoke them. Later in the evening, David's father, Richard, returned to the reception alone. He approached us hesitantly, clearly unsure of his welcome after what had transpired. "I owe you both an apology," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I've suspected for years that Eleanor's behavior was becoming increasingly problematic, but I looked the other way. I made excuses. I enabled her." "Where is she now?" David asked, his tone careful but not cold. "I took her home," Richard replied. "She's struggling to process what happened. I've suggested she speak with someone professional, and for the first time she didn't immediately dismiss the idea." David nodded, considering this information. "I think that would be wise." Richard turned to me, genuine remorse in his eyes. "Natalie, what Eleanor did was unforgivable. I want you to know that I don't condone any of it, and I'm deeply sorry I didn't intervene sooner." "Thank you," I said, simply appreciating his sincerity, while understanding that rebuilding trust would take time. "I hope that someday we can find a way forward as a family," Richard continued. "But I understand that will require real change, not just apologies." David put his arm around my waist, a subtle but clear indication of where his priorities lay. "We're open to that possibility, Dad, but it would have to be on very different terms than before." Richard nodded in understanding before retreating to a table at the edge of the reception, giving us space while making it clear he wanted to be present for his son's wedding day. As the night wound down and we prepared to leave for our honeymoon, Jordan pulled me aside for a final congratulatory hug. "You handled that like an absolute queen," she said proudly. "When I saw that burning dress, I thought the day was ruined. But you turned it into something powerful." "I couldn't have done it without you," I told her sincerely. "The backup dress, the security cameras, all your idea," she grinned. "Just doing my maid of honor duties. Be prepared for psychotic mother-in-law arson wasn't in the official handbook, but I improvised." We laughed together, the tension of the day finally breaking. As David and I made our exit through a tunnel of sparklers held by our cheering guests, I realized that while our wedding day had been nothing like what I had planned, it had been exactly what we needed. A clear-eyed beginning to our marriage with no illusions and no unspoken issues festering beneath the surface. In trying to destroy our wedding, Eleanor had inadvertently given us the gift of truth. And in that truth, we had found a strength that would serve as the foundation for everything to come. 6 months have passed since that dramatic wedding day, and so much has changed in ways I never could have anticipated. David and I have settled into married life in our new home, deliberately purchased in a neighborhood across town from his parents' residence to establish a physical as well as emotional boundary. The first few weeks after the wedding were challenging as we navigated the aftermath of Eleanor's actions. David struggled with complicated feelings of anger, betrayal, and grief for the relationship he had believed he had with his mother. I suggested he speak with a therapist to process these emotions, and to my relief, he agreed without hesitation. "I don't want to carry this baggage into our marriage," he explained. "I need to understand how I became so blind to her manipulation, so I don't repeat those patterns." His commitment to self-awareness and growth only deepened my love for him. While David attended individual therapy, we also began couples counseling. Not because our relationship was in trouble, but because we wanted tools to build the healthiest possible foundation for our future together. I spent years making excuses for my mother's behavior, David acknowledged during one session. I don't want to bring that conflict avoidance tendency into our marriage. The therapist helped us establish clear communication patterns and boundaries, particularly around family interactions. We learnt to recognize when old patterns were emerging and how to address them directly rather than letting tensions simmer. As for Eleanor, the path to reconciliation has been slow and tentative. After nearly a month of no contact following the wedding, she sent a letter. Not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter on expensive stationery. I've been speaking with a therapist. She wrote the admission clearly difficult for her to make. She's helping me understand that my behavior has been controlling and harmful. I don't expect immediate forgiveness, but I want you both to know that I'm working to change. The letter was notable for what it didn't contain. No excuses, no attempts to reframe her actions as misunderstood good intentions. It was the first genuine acknowledgement of responsibility I'd ever seen from Eleanor. David and I discussed the letter extensively before deciding how to respond. We agreed that while we were cautiously optimistic about her efforts, we needed to see sustained change before re-establishing regular contact. We can meet for coffee, David suggested. Neutral location, limited time, clear expectations. That first meeting was awkward and tense. Eleanor looked smaller somehow, less imposing than the woman who had dominated social interactions with sheer force of will. She spoke hesitantly about her therapy and the realizations she was having about her need to control her children's lives. I've always defined myself through you and Melissa, she admitted to David. When you chose someone I hadn't selected or approved, it felt like losing a part of my identity. It wasn't a complete transformation. Old habits surfaced in subtle ways throughout our conversation, but there was a new awareness that hadn't been there before. When she caught herself making a slightly controlling comment about our new home purchase, she actually stopped mid-sentence and rephrased. Over the months, these meetings have continued, gradually increasing in frequency, but always with clear boundaries in place. Richard, David's father, has been an unexpected ally in this process. After decades of enabling Eleanor's behavior, he's found his own voice and begun attending therapy sessions with her. I failed both of you by not intervening years ago, he told us. During a dinner at a restaurant, we're not yet comfortable having Eleanor in our home. I'm trying to make up for that now by supporting Eleanor's growth, while also standing firm when old patterns emerge. The relationship is still fragile, still being rebuilt, one careful interaction at a time. There are good days and difficult ones. Last month, when Eleanor made a pointed comment about my photography career during brunch, David immediately addressed it rather than letting it slide. Mum, that comment diminishes Natalie's accomplishments, and it's not acceptable, he said firmly. Eleanor looked startled, then embarrassed. You're right. I apologize, Natalie. Your career is impressive on its own merits. These small moments of accountability and growth give me hope that eventually we might develop a healthy, if always somewhat guarded family relationship. Meanwhile, my own career has taken an interesting turn. After our wedding story, which despite our best efforts at discretion became something of a local legend in Chicago's wedding industry, I began receiving inquiries from brides dealing with their own difficult family dynamics. I heard you handled an impossible situation with grace. One bride wrote in her inquiry email, My future mother-in-law isn't quite setting dresses on fire, but she's making planning miserable. I need a photographer who understands these dynamics. Recognizing a need that wasn't being addressed in the wedding industry, I've begun specializing in what I jokingly call high-conflict wedding photography, essentially providing not just photography services, but also strategies for navigating family tension during wedding planning and on the big day itself. I've even started a support group that meets monthly in a cozy coffee shop downtown. What began with 5 women sharing stories of difficult in-laws has grown to over 20 regular attendees, both brides and grooms, all seeking ways to establish healthy boundaries while planning their weddings. You turned something traumatic into something helpful for others, David observed proudly after I returned from a particularly powerful group session. That's who you are. You find the opportunity in adversity. His words touched me deeply because they reflected the journey we've been on together. The wedding dress fire, as devastating as it was in the moment, sparked a necessary confrontation that ultimately strengthened our marriage before it even officially began. David's relationship with his father has also evolved in unexpected ways. With Eleanor no longer dominating their family interactions, father and son have developed a closer bond. They meet for lunch regularly, just the two of them rebuilding a connection that had been overshadowed by Eleanor's larger personality. "I'm getting to know my dad for the first time," David told me after one such lunch. "He's so different when Mom's not around. Funnier, more relaxed, more interested in my actual life, rather than the life she wanted for me." Richard has become an unexpected ally in maintaining healthy boundaries, often running interference, when Eleanor begins slipping back into old patterns. He's also made efforts to connect with me independently, showing genuine interest in my photography and occasionally accompanying me to art exhibits when David is on call at the hospital. We've established our own family traditions now separate from the formal status-conscious gatherings that characterized David's family events in the past. Our home has become a place where friends gather for casual dinner parties, where David's hospital colleagues and my photography friends mix easily without the rigid social stratification Eleanor had always insisted upon. Perhaps the most significant change came 3 months ago when we discovered I was pregnant. After the initial joy and excitement, we faced the question of how and when to share the news with Eleanor and Richard. "This is a test," I acknowledged during a conversation with our therapist. "How we handle this will set the tone for our child's relationship with their grandparents." We decided to tell them in person in a public restaurant, with clear expectations established beforehand. To my surprise, Eleanor's reaction was one of genuine joy, tempered with what appeared to be nervous uncertainty about her role. "I'd like to be involved," she said carefully, "but I understand that will be up to you both to decide how and when." This acknowledgement of our authority as parents, so different from the controlling approach she had taken to our wedding, showed real progress. We assured her that we wanted her to be part of our child's life, while being clear that the same boundaries that governed our relationship would extend to her grandparenting. Since that conversation, Eleanor has been cautiously respectful, asking rather than assuming when it comes to baby preparations. When she suggested hosting a baby shower, she immediately added, "But of course, only if you'd like that, Natalie, and you would choose the guest list." These small acknowledgements of my authority in my own life feel like significant victories after years of her attempting to override my preferences. As I sit in our home office preparing for a meeting with a new bride, facing her own future mother-in-law challenges, I rest my hand on my growing baby bump and reflect on the journey that brought us here. The dress-burning incident, which felt like a catastrophe at the time, was actually the catalyst for creating the healthy family dynamics our child will now be born into. I've started a blog chronicling my experiences and offering advice to others facing similar challenges. The response has been overwhelming. Hundreds of comments and emails from people dealing with boundary issues in their own families, all grateful for the validation that they're not alone and that it's okay to stand firm against manipulation. My story has become a touch point for others, proof that sometimes the most difficult moments can lead to the most necessary growth. The fire that was meant to destroy my wedding instead forged a stronger, more resilient relationship built on honesty, boundaries, and true partnership. David comes up behind me as I'm finishing an email, wrapping his arms around me and resting his hands on my stomach. "How are my two favorite people today?" he asks, kissing the top of my head. "We're perfect," I reply, leaning back against him. "Just finishing up some work before dinner. I got a text from Mum," he mentions casually. "She's asking if we'd like to come over for lunch this weekend. She says Dad's grilling and it would be low-key. A year ago, such an invitation would have filled me with dread. Now I consider it thoughtfully. That might be nice, actually, as long as it stays low-key as promised." David nods, understanding all that's unspoken in my response. "I'll tell her yes, but we'll need to leave by 3 for your doctor's appointment." "Perfect." I agree, appreciating how he naturally builds in the boundaries we've established together. As he moves to the kitchen to start dinner, I turn back to my computer to finish one last email. It's to a bride who reached out after hearing my story, desperate for advice about her own controlling future mother-in-law. "The most important thing," I write, "is that you and your fiancé are united. Everything else can be worked through if you're standing together. Sometimes the most painful confrontations lead to the healthiest outcomes. Trust yourself, set your boundaries, and remember that your wedding is just one day. It's your marriage that matters in the long run." I send the email, then close my laptop ready to join David in the kitchen. Our journey hasn't been easy, but it's been authentic. The fire that was meant to destroy our wedding instead burned away the pretense and people-pleasing that might have undermined our marriage from within. From those ashes, something stronger and more beautiful emerged. A relationship based on truth, courage, and the determination to build the family we choose, not the one others tried to force upon us. Have you ever had to stand up to a difficult family member at an important moment in your life? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more real-life experiences and how to navigate complicated family dynamics. If you know someone dealing with boundary issues before their wedding, please share this video with them. Sometimes knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the strongest relationships are forged through fire.